Trump has been making waves the last few days with his appointment announcements. Here's the good, the bad, and the ugly of the current appointments. Thank you for joining me on the 25th episode of the LAVA Spurt, the Trump Appointments edition.
Welcome to the LAVA Spurt, the weekly offshoot of the lava flow. Channeling the flow of information to the libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, voluntarist, and agorist community. Brought to you by my per-episode donors. Thank you. Here's your host, Roger Paxton.
Trump has already announced many of his appointments, so let's take a close look at them. Keep in mind, most of these will still have to be confirmed by the Senate, but that's generally not going to be a problem with an incoming administration, especially with a Republican-controlled Senate. While I won't be able to hit all of his appointments here, there are a few that do stand out. And of those that stand out, there are, believe it or not, some fairly good appointments in the list. For example, Tom Price, a Republican congressman and orthopedic surgeon from Georgia. He will be appointed as the Secretary of Health and Human Services. He's been one of the leading voices in Congress calling for the repeal of Obamacare, drafting multiple bills to replace it. He's going to be Trump's right-hand man in making this happen. If it's going to happen, it will be because of Price. Price is personally against same-sex marriage, but his appointment as HHS Secretary will have no impact on that issue at all, so he's a net positive. Scott Pruitt, the Attorney General of Oklahoma, will be appointed as the head of the Environmental Protection Agency, and he has to be the first person ever appointed to a cabinet position or he is suing that department. Yes, Scott Pruitt is currently in the middle of a lawsuit with the EPA as the Attorney General of Oklahoma. That's pretty badass if you ask me. He has actually repeatedly sued the EPA to roll back environmental regulations. Hopefully this appointment will lead to ending some of the crippling regulations put in place by the EPA. The Secretary of Education will be Betsy DeVos, one of at least 5 billionaires appointed by Trump. Public school unions are furious over this appointment in particular, which means it is likely going to be an excellent appointment. The head of one of the largest teachers' unions called DeVos, quote, the most ideological anti-public education nominee since the development of the department. That sounds like an endorsement to me. DeVos and her husband spent nearly $1.5 million of personal money to prevent the state of Michigan from adding oversight to charter schools. She's also sought to steer money from public schools into private schools. Now, this sounds like a great combo to me. Get the money out of public schools and get the regulation out of private schools. This is a win-win, regardless. And just today, it was announced that Trump is expected to name Andy Puzder, CEO of the parent company of Carl's Jr. and Hardee's burger chains, as his labor secretary. Puzder has been a vocal advocate for cutting back regulations that he says have stifled growth in the restaurant industry. Mr. Puzder has criticized the Affordable Care Act and argued against raising the minimum wage higher than $9 an hour. His appointment could mean scaling back many regulations that hurt businesses and make hiring people much too expensive. Now for the bad. We'll start with Ben Carson, being nominated as the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Why is this bad? Well, because his only experience with public housing was growing up in it when he was a child in Detroit 60 years ago. He even told a friend of his that he was considering not accepting the nomination because he has no experience. However, though, he has said in the past that, quote, we the people have the responsibility to take care of the indigent in our society. It's not the government's job. So honestly, I think this one could go either way, but I'm leaning bad on it. And Nikki Haley has been appointed as the United Nations ambassador. She's the youngest governor in the country and the first female governor of South Carolina. She has 0 foreign policy experience and opposed allowing Syrian refugees into South Carolina. However, she did call Trump's call to ban Muslims from the U.S., quote, un-American. So again, this one could go either way, but yeah, I'm leaning bad for sure. And now for the ugly. And God damn it if it isn't ugly. First, we have James Mattis as Secretary of Defense. He's a retired Marine Corps general who is known as, quote, Mad Dog. He shares Trump's positions of taking a stronger approach with Iran and sees political Islam as a significant threat to the U.S. In 2005, he was quoted as saying, quote, "You go into Afghanistan. You've got guys there that slap women around for 5 years because they didn't wear a veil. So it's a hell of a lot of fun to shoot them." Mattis has had a hard-on for Iran for 33 years, going back to the Beirut suicide bombing in 1983 that killed 220 Marines and 21 other Americans. In fact, Mattis's anti-Iran animus is so intense that it led President Barack Obama to replace him as CENTCOM commander. Interestingly, Mattis disagrees with Trump on Russia and President Putin, seeming to agree more with Clinton in this area than Trump. So basically, the defense secretary wants war with Iran and Russia. We may as well make it official and change the name of this department back from the Department of Defense to the fucking War Department. Jeff Sessions will be the incoming top law enforcement officer of the country as Attorney General. A junior senator from Alabama for the past 20 years, Sessions is a staunch racist, and he's pro-drug war. He once described the Ku Klux Klan as, quote, "okay, until I found out that they smoked pot." He's been described as a drug war dinosaur and could bring back the worst of the war on drugs to this country. He's called cannabis reform a, quote, "tragic mistake," and that it's a very real danger, that is not the kind of thing that ought to be legalized. His racist roots are even further evident in that he said a white lawyer who takes on black clients is a, quote, "disgrace to their race." Sessions has also made comments that make it appear that he's against end-to-end encryption, and he's called for government officials to have complete access to encrypted devices. This is a bad, bad appointment. And Mike Pompeo has been tapped by Trump to be the director of the CIA. Pompeo has spoken out in favor of the CIA's use of torture, which, according to a Senate report, included waterboarding, the use of electric shocks, dogs, nudity, hypothermia, and mock executions. He supports government surveillance programs like the NSA's mass collection of data from Americans' phone calls. And he thinks that Edward Snowden should be put to death. Fuck this guy in the neck. And finally, Michael Flynn will be the National Security Advisor for Trump. A former Army Lieutenant General, he believes the greatest threat to America is, quote, "radical Islamic terrorism." He's called Milo Yiannopoulos one of the bravest people he's ever met, and is a pretty staunch member of the alt-right. As the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, which he was later fired from, his subordinates started a list of what they call, quote, "Flynn facts," things that he would say that simply weren't true. Like when he asserted that 3/4 of all new cell phones were bought by Africans, or later that Iran had killed more Americans than Al-Qaeda. So here we have a guy who is willing to stretch the truth openly to get his way. He'll make a perfect fit for Trump. So as we've seen here, Trump's goods are pretty decent, but his bad, and his ugly list especially, far outweigh any good that could be accomplished by this team. This is a pretty scary fucking list, frankly. We're going to be in for one hell of a ride the next 4 years. Put your tray tables in their upright position and hold the fuck on, because it's going to get ugly. Until next time, keep striking the root.
Thank you for listening to The Lava Flow at thelavaflow.com. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe now at thelavaflow.com/subscribe. This has been a Pax Libertas Productions podcast.